Tom Harwood.
Well, during Prime Minister's questions, the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition clashed over defence spending. Kemi Badenoch pressed Keir Starmer over whether the government's increase to defence includes funding that will be used for the Chagos Islands deal.
Elsewhere, GBNews can exclusively reveal that more than 2,000 small boat migrants have crossed illegally from France since the beginning of this year. The grim figure was reached last night as at least 138 migrants arrived into Dover Harbour.
And one question for you. Would you give up your kebab to save the planet? Well, the Climate Change Committee has said we all need to give up 2 doner kebabs worth of meat a week, scrap our gas boiler, and we also need to halve the number of sheep and cattle in the country in order to get those carbon emissions down.
Elsewhere, dramatic scenes outside the BBC last night. Furious protesters accused the broadcaster of pushing Hamas propaganda. We'll speak to a man on the scene.
This Climate Change Committee has too much power and too little accountability, doesn't it? Come up with these ideas that will affect the minutiae of our lives, every single aspect, and the government has to listen, don't they?
Well, yes, if the government accepts the carbon budget. So there have been 6 of these so far, I think. The Climate Change Act established this committee back in 2008. Ironically, since 2008, we've seen productivity absolutely flatline in this country. I mean, some would say that's the global financial crisis. I might be being trite to say that this is a correlation, but it certainly is the case that that when the government accepts this climate budget, as it's called, if any policy doesn't fit within that budget, anyone can sue the government. And then we get judges and lawyers and lawfare saying this new road or this new power station or this new housing development, well, it's not within your carbon budget. We're going to have to stop it. We're going to have to throw it through the courts. You can't have that drilling site. You can't drill for that oil because that's not within the carbon budget. You can't have that runway.
It's always the lawyers that win, isn't it? It's always the lawyers that win. But yes, apparently we need to give up 2 kebabs worth of meat in order to save the planet. Apparently we need to be taxed more when we fly, if we're even allowed to fly. We need 4 in 5 cars to be electric, yet the sales of those seem to be going down. And we all need to rip out our gas boiler, of course, and put in a delightful heat pump. So there you go. Would you do that to save the planet? I must say, this all comes on the day that BP, the oil giant, have announced that they're going to be slashing their green stuff, their green investment, and just going for gas and oil. Drill, baby, drill is what they're doing. Meanwhile, we're concreting over every chance of that.
It's fascinating. Up until now, these so-called carbon budgets from the Climate Committee, they've done the relatively easy stuff, the low-hanging fruit. But now we're getting to the stuff like our flights and heating our homes and what we eat.
Our sheep.
I mean, this stuff is going to be more and more encroaching upon our lives. The question is, should the government accept or throw out this new so-called carbon budget?
Yes, well, we're going to have a farmer on who's not impressed by the cutting half of all of our sheep and cattle, I can tell you that. But do let us know your thoughts. Would you give up your kebab to save the planet? But it is the headlines now with Sophia Wensler. So, Sam...
Almost, but not quite. It's Sam Francis, not Sophia Wensler. She'll be here with you very shortly. First, though, a look at the top stories from the newsroom. And Kemi Badenoch accused the Prime Minister of copying her proposal to fund an increase in defence spending with cuts to foreign aid. In a clash at Prime Minister's questions, the Conservative leader said she backs the increase, but questions if it's really £13.4 billion a year, as Mr Starmer claims, or closer to £6 billion, as his Defence Secretary suggested this morning.
How is it that the Defence Secretary says 6 billion and he says 13.4 billion? The IFS said today that the government is playing silly games with numbers. How does he find this difference in numbers?
However, Sir Keir Starmer insists the figure is correct and accused Kemi Badenoch of a desperate search for relevance.
She's appointed herself, I think, saviour of the Western civilization. It's a desperate search for relevance. But, Mr Speaker, look, if you take the numbers for this financial year, And then the numbers for the financial year 27-28, that's £13.4 billion increase. That is the largest sustained increase in defence spending since the Cold War, which will put us in a position to ensure the security and defence of our country and of Europe.
In other news, more than 2,000 small boat migrants have crossed the Channel illegally since the start of this year. The latest group of 138 arrived last night, brought to Dover by Border Force after being picked up in UK waters. Earlier, another boat was intercepted after some on board refused French rescue and continued towards Britain. Sources say people smugglers are now taking bigger risks, launching in rough seas after weeks of bad weather. The government is pushing for new laws to criminalise those who reject rescue as they vow to smash the gangs. Israel is expected to release 600 Palestinian prisoners after a delay over Hamas's treatment of Israeli hostages. They'll be freed in exchange for the bodies of 4 Israelis, likely today or tomorrow. The move clears the way for fresh ceasefire talks as US envoy Steve Witkoff heads to the region. It comes as thousands gathered in Israel earlier today to mourn Shiri Bibas and her 2 young sons, whose bodies were returned by Hamas last week. Israel and Hamas have both signalled commitment to the ceasefire deal, but the next phase remains uncertain. BP has confirmed a major U-turn on green energy, slashing more than $5 billion from its net zero spending each year, instead ramping up oil and gas production. They had pledged to cut oil and gas output by 40% by 2030, but the energy giant will now be investing up to $10 billion annually in fossil fuels. That's an increase of 20%. BP CEO calls it a reset with an unwavering focus on long-term shareholder value. But environmental groups and some shareholders warn the shift could backfire, while Greenpeace says BP should brace for pushback at every turn. In sport, Liverpool boss Arne Slot has been handed a 2-game ban for confronting the referee after their 2-2 draw at Everton. The FA have released an official statement today confirming he'll miss Wednesday's clash with Newcastle and Southampton's visit on the 8th of March. However, he can be on the sidelines for their Champions League tie against PSG. Assistant coach Sipke Hulshoff is also banned for 2 games. Meanwhile, Liverpool and Everton clubs have both been fined £65,000 and £50,000 for failing to control their players. Apple says a bug caused iPhones to briefly display the word Trump when users said the word racist using voice to text. Clips of the glitch have gone viral, with some Trump supporters accusing the tech giant of political bias. Apple says it's rolling out a fix, blaming a speech recognition issue that briefly suggests words with phonetic similarities. It comes amid wider concerns over political bias in other tech companies after Meta was accused of automatically making users follow Donald Trump after the US election. And just before I hand you back to Tom and Emily, a breaking line just into us that Henry Kelly, who of course presented well-known TV shows such as Going for Gold and Game for a Laugh, has sadly died today at the age of 78. In a statement from his family, they said he passed peacefully on Tuesday after a period of ill health. They added in that statement that Henry will be sorely missed by his friends and family, including his partner Carolyn, their son and daughter, and his mother too. Her mother, rather. So Henry Kelly, who has died today at the age of 78. That's the news on GB News. I'll be back with you in half an hour. Now, though, it's over to Westminster.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 9 minutes past 1, and we're going to kick straight off with the back and forth at Prime Minister's questions. Kemi Badenoch pressed the PM over whether the government's increase in defence spending actually includes taxpayer money, extra taxpayer money being sent to Chagos, being sent to Mauritius over that deal.
That would be quite the scandal if it does turn out that a chunk of the increased defence spending that is supposed to be spent on our security may actually go into the hands of Mauritius. He didn't give a conclusive reply, did city.
He simply said that there's no deal, so I can't... I mean, well, will it be or won't it be?
He doesn't know, apparently. Should we get the thoughts of our political correspondent, Catherine Forster, who joins us from Westminster Hall? Catherine, Kemi Badenoch, she did ask that question a couple of times, didn't she? And a backbencher asked it too. Keir Starmer seemed to get away with not really answering it.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of non-answers masquerading as answers in PMQs today, wasn't there? As so often happens, unfortunately, with politicians. So yes, Kemi Badenoch focused entirely on the meeting that the PM will be having with Donald Trump tomorrow and defence spending more broadly. On that question of the Chagos Islands, it's very convenient, isn't it, to say, well, there is no deal, so at the point at which there is a deal, we'll let you know in the usual way. I also asked the Prime Minister's official spokesman just ahead of PMQs, as I was going to be rushing out about that. An answer came there, none. No answer to really either on the actual figures. The Institute for Fiscal Studies has accused the Prime Minister of not being totally straight with people with the numbers that he gave yesterday, because yesterday he said defence will be getting 13.4 billion more by 2027. But it's since emerged that, in fact, it's more like half of that if you take into effect things like inflation and this growth, which we're always hearing about, that hasn't yet materialised. Certainly the cuts to the foreign aid budget that have been made, earmarked to pay for it, don't amount to anything like that. So lots and lots of unanswered questions. But I did think that Kemi Badenoch struggled really today, in that the PM was quite brutal in his sort of takedown of her when she tried to claim credit for cutting the foreign aid budget that the government's now doing. She said this was her idea. Reform, of course, have floated that too, but the PM basically saying that she's in a desperate search for relevance, and of course all eyes now on the Prime Minister going to Washington for that hugely important meeting with Trump tomorrow. We saw Macron, we saw the bromance resurrected from Trump's first presidency. I don't expect we'll see anything like that, but this meeting is critically important, because it is clear that Europe is going to have to spend a lot more on defence, that the US priorities lie elsewhere. And I thought it was interesting in PMQs, the PM and the Conservatives are incredibly careful about what they say about Donald Trump for obvious reasons. But Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, can be a little bit freer, and he said that it's clear that we won't be able to rely on the US going forward. So a huge meeting tomorrow. The House of Commons united for once behind the Prime Minister in wishing for a good outcome from that meeting.
Well, it'll be absolutely fascinating to watch. I, for one, will be glued, absolutely glued to the press conferences, the back and forth, the Oval Office sit down. Oh my goodness me, it's going to be a ride and a half. Catherine Forster for now inside Westminster Hall for us, that beautiful 1,000-year-old part of Parliament. I always love it when Catherine or Chopper come to us from there. It's just nice to have.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, the hustle and bustle. What a beautiful room that dates back to the 11th. Hang on.
Yeah, it's 1,000 years old. Yeah,
which is quite incredible, really.
It was the largest art tool.
Don't get that in the United States.
You certainly don't. It's the largest art tool in the world, at least in Europe, when it was built.
Christopher Hope, our political editor, just tweeted, and I think he's right. He says, why did Tory leader Kemi Badenoch not use one of her 6 questions to ask about the £100 hike in millions of people's energy bills? That's a good one. Or the fact that BP have just turned their back on green energy, given the government's dash for net zero. I mean, I think both of those points are very important, and we're going to be covering them today in the show. So there you go.
Absolutely are. So do stay tuned, because there is a lot changing with regard to our energy and indeed the restrictions placed on businesses in the country. But we're going to return now to foreign affairs, joined by the former Conservative Special Advisor, also fellow at the Adam Smith Institute, James Price. Because, James, the Chagos deal is something that the government refuses to talk about. They won't even say how much money it costs. The information we get is from the Mauritian Parliament and their media. It seems extraordinary. But clearly, if we're going to be leasing this base back from Mauritius, that is money that's going to come out of our newly increased defence budget.
The whole thing is just absolutely extraordinary, isn't it? Now, just to give people the context of this again, this is one of our many wonderful little overseas dependencies. Think kind of Jersey or Guernsey or Bermuda, the British Virgin Islands, the Falklands, all these wonderful little bits of our islands story that we've still got. And the principal use for this place, the Chagos, is, as you say, this amazing military position and a military base that the Americans have, and we work out of there with them. Incredibly important where it's located. And yet, for some reason, some mad, loony, lefty lawyers have decided that we need to give this away. And this was, by the way, not even a binding judgment. It was a judgment of some foreign court, and the people who sit on that court have been put there by, you guessed it, Vladimir Putin and Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping. And yet the Attorney General who works for Starmer himself, their whole lives are predicated on the idea that international law is, frankly, more important to adhere to than British law or the British national interest. And we've found ourselves in this completely bonkers scenario that we're giving away sovereign British territory along with, what is it going to be, £9 billion, £18 billion as is now being reported, more, by the way, than the entire GDP of Mauritius. It's completely crackers.
Yeah, I mean, James, it absolutely is. I mean, Keir Starmer said today in PMQs, he said, the US are rightly looking at the deal when it's finalised. I'll put it before the House with the costings. He says the figures being bandied around are absolutely wild at the mark. The deal is well over a century, but the funding I announced is for our capabilities, etc., etc. But he's not giving us a figure. He's not telling us where exactly they are in these negotiations. He's not telling us why it's so important for the United States to look at the deal. That didn't appear to be on the table before when it was conversations. It seems to be the case since Donald Trump came in. Just the lack of transparency, not allowing the British public to be able to assess what this deal actually means for our pocket. And if it does turn out, James, that it's coming from our defence budget, well, that's a scandal in and of itself.
Yeah, you're completely right. I'm not surprised that he doesn't want to talk about this because he knows that the whole thing stinks. And, you know, a couple of weeks ago at PMQs, he tried this line saying, well, if Kemi Badenoch looked at the security briefing we'd offered her, she'd understand why this was so important. And this was followed by some spurious briefing about, oh, well, you know, we need to give it away so that our communications there still works. I mean, if Mauritius can manage to turn off, or other people can turn off our secret communications coming out of there or anywhere else as easily as that, then we've got bigger fish to fry. And speaking of those bigger fish to fry, God, I wouldn't want to be Starmer on most days, but especially not as he heads over to DC now to go and deal with President Trump. If he thinks that the Americans are so clueless as to not realize if he is messing around with figures here, he's got another thing coming. I think the issue is of massive importance. You've got American senators talking about it on the Senate floor, saying, please, you know, we've got the special relationship. Don't do this catastrophic act of self-harm. And if you're also trying to pull the wool over Trump's eyes and say, look, we are spending more money on defense, and it turns out that a huge chunk of that spending increase, which of course is vastly necessary as the world gets more dangerous, if a huge chunk of that is just giving it away to a country who is no friend of ours to take our own territory, Trump's going to laugh him all the way out of town, and we're going to be in bigger trouble.
It's ironic, isn't it? We're talking about a cut to foreign aid to fund this defence spending. But if all of this defence spending, or a huge chunk of it, just goes to Mauritius, how is that not foreign aid? We're just rebranding the foreign aid we were giving away to poor countries to give it away to a medium-income country. I mean, we're taking money from sub-Saharan Africa to give to a coastal African country. I mean, that's all that's happening.
It makes the international human rights lawyers feel good at night, doesn't it? Can we? I also want to ask you about what this means for David Lammy. Because for David Lammy, foreign aid is something that he's banged on about for years. He thinks it's very, very important. In 2021, he condemned the Conservatives for decreasing foreign aid. That was from 0.7 to 0.5. It's now going to be 0.3. Or 0.2, and he said it's a mean-spirited Trumpian decision to cut foreign aid. He also warned it would cost lives. He said this is a huge moral failure and it leaves Britain's global reputation in tatters. I mean, James, if he's so principled about this issue, why has he not handed in a letter of resignation?
It's a very, very good question. There's an awful lot of stupid things that David Lammy said before he got into office and is realizing that it's coming back to bite him. Because, of course, you know, all the talk of our own defense budget and our foreign aid budget, it pales in comparison to the fact that David Lammy for many years was demanding reparations for Caribbean countries and anybody else involved in slavery. And GBNews did a great job of highlighting that. I was on your show when this came out and some footage emerged of Lammy saying, we want reparations. I don't know who the we in that sentence is supposed to be because he's the British Foreign Secretary now. But you're right. It's also just incredibly embarrassing. The whole thing is embarrassing. You know, we're supposed to be talking about, our soft power, right? Britain's an amazing soft power country because of all the culture and also because of all the foreign aid spending that we do. Most of that ends up being on things like Ethiopian Spice Girls and all kinds of other silly stories that come out. You've seen the silly stories about what the American aid spending has come across, and Elon Musk has exposed lots of it.
Well, James, you don't think highly of the Bangladeshi shrimp research that we've highly invested in?
No, nor the Americans who are funding transgender operas in Chile. But, you know, the only thing that our soft power is known for, frankly, in America these days, is the grooming gang scandal that, again, GBNews has done a great job of highlighting, and is the fact that we have completely lost or are losing our culture thanks to ever greater waves of mass migration and the stabbings that seem to happen almost daily. So maybe we should fix ourselves here and then start fixing our continent and then dare to lecture anybody else. But I don't think that Starmer's going to be in a position to do very well with Trump tomorrow, whatever happens.
Well, James Price, you're so right to raise the grooming gang scandal, because whilst it's sort of dropped from the top news line of many different news providers, we're going to be live at a trial of accused grooming gang perpetrators a little bit later in the show. We certainly have not let this one drop. James Price, former government advisor, thanks very much indeed for joining us here on Good Afternoon Britain.
Well, let us know what you think. But this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. We have got lots more coming up on today's show. Yes, put the doner kebab down to save the planet. That's the advice from the Climate Change Committee. Will the government listen?
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
A new study has found that almost 8 in 10 of Gen Z Brits believe that the romantic poems of Shakespeare, Keats, Barrett Browning and the rest are outdated and irrelevant. Can we re-engage youngsters with such verse? Can the Gen Z audience become infatuated with love poetry? Joining me now is the Professor and Chair of English at the University of Virginia, Andrew Stauffer. Andrew, welcome to GB News. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Michael. Thank you for having me.
What is it that a poet does with language and in love, with language and with love, to express love better than any other way in which it can be expressed?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it is, it's relying on language as being the primary way that we get in touch with our feelings, that, poetry is the language art par excellence. And so it's the assumption that the more we can use our words to talk about our feelings, the deeper, more pleasurable, more available those feelings actually are to us. And so in a certain way, reading poetry, not only we recognize our feelings, we even catch feelings from art, from poems, from songs, from stories. There's a way that even our own most personal relationships are structured by the culture that we have grown up in and that we've been immersed in. And so it really can be an aid, or at least a transformative experience to encounter language, to give yourself words for your own very private feelings that turns out have been felt by other people going all the way back to Sappho and Catullus and Horace and through Shakespeare and through the whole English tradition. So that can be galvanizing as well, really kind of eye-opening to know that you're not alone in your feelings.
GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 24 minutes past 1. Now, if you want to do your bit for the planet, the amount of meat and dairy we all eat, it'll need to fall by a quarter.
Yes, so that means apparently getting rid of a quarter, or nearly 50% of our sheep and cattle, which would be quite the blow for British farmers.
And new research shows giving up your doner kebab every week. Who eats a weekly kebab? I haven't eaten a kebab in years. Well, apparently that'll be enough to keep the UK within safe climate limits by the end of the decade.
I used to eat a lot of kebabs at university.
Did you?
Yeah.
After a night out?
After a night out,
Classic.
I did indeed. As sloppy as you like. Anyway, this all comes... this is quite interesting because we're getting this type of advice from the Climate Change Committee. The minutiae of our lives needs to change. But at the same time today, oil giant BP is actually just announced that it's going to slash its renewable energy investments and instead focus on increasing oil and gas production. So yes, BP, alongside other oil companies, have set some very ambitious targets to cut production of oil and gas by 40%. Well, they're actually saying that they're not going to worry so much about the green stuff, and they're just going to go drill, baby, drill.
They are indeed ditching those stricter targets that they had up until this year. Well, let's talk to a farmer about all of this, because really the Climate Change Committee is talking about getting rid of almost half of the livestock in this country to meet our climate targets. Delighted to speak to the founder of Concept Dairy, Diarmaid McLaughlin. Diarmaid, thanks so much for being here. This is a pretty big blow to farmers, to people who work in agriculture of all sorts, if of course, the government accepts this advice.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. It really is a big blow for farmers all over UK, Ireland. And what it really shows is the strength of other lobbies versus the agriculture sector and the ability to get the message across. So let's look at, for example, you have BP on there a second ago, and they're going to drill, baby, drill. And you see the way carbon is actually measured. It's measured the same for gas emissions as it is emissions from a cow. And we all know that, from our kind of secondary school science classes, that it's a circular system. So the way it's measured is fundamentally wrong, and the effects on farmers is absolutely huge. They're really, really struggling at the moment to be able to break even. And now to have all these other pressures on them, and we know the cost of sustainability, but the problem is farmers are not being paid. They can make the changes on farms. We're seeing it with some really good examples out there. We're seeing examples by a company called Barber's who make really good cheese, treat their farmers fairly. You've got First Milk in Scotland doing really good regenerative farming, making these natural changes. But these announcements are very unhelpful.
Yeah, I mean, it does appear as though the Climate Change Committee is launching a campaign against farmers with this one, really. I mean, if you were to get rid of 25% of sheep and cattle, how many farmers would that push out of business? A lot, I imagine. If you were to halve the number of sheep and cattle in this country, which seems to be one of the more long-term proposals, that would decimate the British countryside in so many ways. It appears to me that these people are totally out of touch.
Oh, completely. We're already losing. Every 3 days, we're losing nearly 4 dairy farms. Every 3 days. That's how crazy it is. And this is why we really need change. So 25% there is 3,500. So 1,750 farms would have to shut down. That's dairy alone. Then you add the effect on beef, sheep, all the other sectors. It's absolutely phenomenal. And what's going to happen is, well, people still need to eat. Fundamentally, people still need to eat. You can't eat data from a data center. You need food. So farmers need to produce that food. And if it's not produced in the UK or Ireland or Northwest Europe, it's going to come from somewhere else in the world. And we've seen huge imports into the UK already of food. We're going to see dairy being replaced with other products such as palm oil. We're already seeing it with dairy milk chocolate, for example. They've taken some of the cream out and replaced it with palm oil. And everyone thinks there's a glass and a half in every bar, but it's only skim milk. It's not whole milk. So it's already happening, but we really, really need to make these changes.
It is fascinating, your point on imports, because this is precisely what's happening with BP as well. Just 10% of their business is drilling in the UK. We have banned...
Surprised it's that much.
We've banned new oil and gas in the North Sea, new exploration under this government. And so all of the drill, baby drill that BP is going to be doing, none of it is going to be in the UK. They're going to ramp up production in America. They're going to ramp up production. I saw in a press release they called it in the Gulf of America. To you and me, that might be the Gulf of Mexico. But but clearly, it's the same sort of mindset. Do less and less, whether it's producing energy or producing food in this country. And then when we need energy, as we do, and when we need food, as we do, we import it from elsewhere.
But that's the fatal flaw of the Climate Change Committee. Their whole point of being is that they assume that if we cut down on our carbon emissions, if we get rid of oil and gas, if we cut down on our meat, all the other countries will follow suit and follow our lead. But we haven't seen any evidence of that.
No. Just finally, dear Maud, where do we go from here?
I think we really need to look at it in a holistic manner. My background is oil and gas trading, so I understand that world very, very well. And you can't treat the gas coming out of the ground and being burnt the same as emissions from a cow or a human. Like we all need to eat on a day-to-day basis. We all eat food. We emit carbon as humans. It's very similar for animals, but the methane goes into a cycle up in the air, and it's a 12-year cycle, but it comes back at the end of the day into grass, and then it's one of the healthiest parts of food. And if you just do 1 second before we move on, if you look at a corn, and okay, you can eat the corn and the cobs, but all the other parts of the corn. So for every 1 and 4 kilos, for every 1 kilo, you can only eat it. The 4 kilos is waste, and that's where cows come in. They can eat that and produce milk, beef, all these other products from it. So we really need to look at it from a much more holistic perspective and get some real science behind it.
Yeah, I mean, the goalposts are being moved all the time. I mean, I've been to farms where they've invested huge amounts of money into trying to reduce carbon emissions, and then to be told, actually, we need to get rid of them all. Anyway, thank you very much indeed for coming on, and great to also have the oil and gas background as well, very relevant. Dear Maud McCall-Kane, thank you very much, founder of Concept Dairy. Well, there you go.
Yeah, it's a huge story, and it will be rolling on and on. Will the government has accepted every single carbon budget from the Climate Change Committee since it was established. Could this be the first one they actually reject? Will the politicians do that? I think it's an open question, but plenty more coming up on today's show. Yes, we're going to be live in Manchester at the trial of 8 men accused of multiple sex offences against 2 teenagers. It's the latest in the grooming gang scandal. We're there live outside the court after this.
Very good afternoon to you from the newsroom. Just after 1:30, the top story. Well, Kemi Badenoch has accused the Prime Minister of copying her proposal to fund an increase in defence spending using cuts to foreign aid. In a clash at Prime Minister's questions earlier, the Conservative leader said she backs the increase, but questions if it's really £13.4 billion a year, as Mr Starmer claims, or closer to £6 billion, as his Defence Secretary suggested this morning.
How is it that the Defence Secretary says 6 billion and he says 13.4 billion? The IFS said today that the government is playing silly games with numbers. How does he find this difference in numbers?
However, Sir Keir Starmer insists the figure is correct and accused Kemi Badenoch of a desperate search for relevance.
She's appointed herself, I think, saviour of the Western civilization. It's a desperate search for relevance. But, Mr Speaker, look, if you take the numbers for this financial year and then the numbers for the financial year 27-28, that's £13.4 billion increase. That is the largest sustained increase in defence spending since the Cold War, which will put us in a position to ensure the security and defence of our country and of Europe.
In other news, more than 2,000 migrants have crossed the Channel illegally since the start of this year. The latest group of 138 people arrived last night, brought into Dover by Border Force after being picked up in UK waters. Earlier, another boat was intercepted after some on board refused French rescue and continued towards Britain. Sources say people smugglers are taking bigger risks, launching even in rough seas after weeks of bad weather. The government is pushing, though, for new laws to criminalise those who reject rescue, as Labour vows to smash the gangs. BP has confirmed a major U-turn on green energy, slashing more than $5 billion from its net zero spending each year, instead ramping up oil and gas production. They've pledged to cut oil and gas output by 40% by 2030, but the energy giant will now invest up to $10 billion annually in fossil fuels. That's an increase of 20%. BP CEO calls it a reset with an unwavering focus on long-term shareholder value. But environmental groups are warning the shift could backfire, with Greenpeace saying BP should freeze at 2 o'clock, and Tom and Emily will be straight back with you after this.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
The latest GB News travel.
Good morning, I'm Russell Holding. In Lancashire, the A585 is closed in both directions northeast of Blackpool after an accident causing queues. In Greater Manchester, the A34 is closed northbound towards the Gatley traffic lights at Cheadle after an accident with long delays towards there. In Wrexham, the A5152 Reuben Road is blocked by an accident near the cemetery causing delays. The M4 in Gloucestershire is blocked eastbound by an accident at junction 18 at Bath with queues towards there. On the M1 in Hertfordshire, 2 out of 3 lanes are closed southbound where cars overturned just after junction 6A for the M25 causing queues. In Berkshire, the A5 is closed westbound from Charville to Sonning after an accident. In Hampshire, the A33 is closed each way northeast of Basingstoke after an accident causing queues. And in East Sussex, buses replaced trains between Crowborough and Uckfield because of a signalling problem. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30am.
Only on GB News.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
No,
because the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Exciting news. Every Friday, my Patrick Christie's Tonight Show is going to have a twist to it. We're welcoming some special guests. You. That's right, on Fridays I'm going to be doing my show in front of a live studio audience because this show is about you and what you have to say. It's going to be the same big debates, same big topics, same big opinions, but every Friday night at 9 p.m. you are invited to come on down to Patrick Christie's Tonight to be a part of the action. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes. Thank you for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
OK, well, 8 men accused of sexual offences against 2 teenage girls in Rochdale are on trial at Manchester Crown Court today. This is the latest in the grooming gangs scandal. Well, our national reporter Charlie Peters has the latest for us. Charlie, tell us about this case.
Well, good afternoon. This case revolves around Rochdale. From 2001 to 2006, 8 men who deny all charges are alleged to have sexually abused 2 teenage girls in the town during that period. And all the men in this trial are related to the taxi industry and also market stalls. And today we heard evidence from Girl A, one of the 2 complainants. And her experiences, as we heard at Manchester Crown Court today, relate to both the markets and the taxis. In written evidence that was read out by Mr. Rossano Scarmadella KC, the prosecuting barrister, we heard about one incident involving Mohammed Zahid, who was the head of one of the major stalls at the market. He headed up a underwear and lingerie stall, and it said, and it was alleged by Girl A, that on several occasions they were given discounts and taken to the wholesale stock areas in Manchester city centre, where they advised Mr. Zahid on the latest fashions. Eventually, though, this behaviour extended into sexual abuse, it was alleged, with Girl A describing an incident where she was taken to a flat where many other men were waiting with her friend. Her friend, she said, was particularly vulnerable to abuse. We then heard from Girl A, again in written evidence, describing meeting with another of the 8 defendants here, Mohammed Shahzad, who was known as Zero, his nickname, a taxi driver. She described being forced into a sex act with several men after she met him through the taxi trade. This experience was described in particularly horrendous detail. I can't explain that detail, but the jury visibly reacted to some of that information. We also heard that the jury were told that this incident was recorded, and the next day at school, Girl A, then around just 14 years old, found that many people at the school had seen that recording of the horrendous ordeal she allegedly endured. She said that that video had ruined her life, that everyone had either had that video or had seen it off somebody else. And then the final incident was described of a man called Lala, a nickname for another defendant. He also is a taxi driver. Girl A described an incident where she said he picked her off the street in a minibus-style taxi, took her away to a secluded area after about a week or so of knowing her, and then forced her into conducting a sex act. She said by then, Girl A, this was in a video interview with the police, that she had just grown accustomed to the abuse and just took her clothes off when he instigated that particular episode of abuse. We then heard from Girl A in that interview with the police, describing how a year after the abuse had occurred, Lala had allegedly started shouting obscenities at her in the street whenever he drove past her in the greater Manchester town of Rochdale. She also said that on one occasion he threw eggs at her and became really horrible, to use her language. Insults and eggs being chucked at her over a year after she was first abused. Now, all of the 8 defendants in this trial deny all charges, and they are Mohammed Zahid, Kashir Bashir, Mushtaq Ahmed, Rahiz Khan, Nisar Hussain, Naheem Akram and Arfan Khan. They deny all charges. They're facing multiple allegations and charges of child sexual abuse. Every defendant is facing a charge of rape. They deny those charges, and here at Manchester Crown Court, the trial continues.
Well, Charlie Peters, thank you for being there live. Of course, we'll catch up with you as and when we have more information on this, the very latest in the ongoing grooming gang scandal.
Yes, indeed. Well, GB News can also exclusively reveal today that more than 2,000 small boat migrants have crossed illegally from France since the beginning of this year.
Yes, the figure was reached last night as at least 138 more migrants arrived into Dover Harbour.
Well, our Home Security editor Mark White is here to tell us more. Mark, 2,000 in the last couple of months. What do we know about who's arriving?
Well, mainly men, about 80–85% men is the norm. And it's remarkable, actually, that 2,000 plus have arrived since the beginning of the year, because we have seen absolutely horrific conditions in the Channel. Of course, we're in the winter and conditions in the Channel can be pretty awful. but it's been particularly bad the last couple of months. So surprising that as many as 2,000 plus have made it across the channel. And that's because people smugglers are taking increasing risks. They're pushing these small flimsy boats out into the channel, even on days where in the past they wouldn't do it because the conditions are just not up to the passage of these vessels. And in fact, French authorities tell us that yesterday they dealt with multiple incidents off the French coast of boats getting into difficulties and migrants having to be rescued. One particular boat, which was overloaded with almost 70 aboard, they responded to just off Dunkirk. 38 people were rescued on that boat, but 24 of those on the boat refused to get on the rescue boat, and they continued their journey to the UK, arriving in UK waters yesterday morning and being picked up, of course, when they did, by Border Force. Incidentally, the UK government is going to currently is passing legislation which will outlaw those who refuse the assistance of the rescue services out in the channel. Those individuals, once this bill has passed through Parliament and gains royal assent, those individuals who refuse the assistance offered by the Maritime Rescue Services can be charged with endangering the lives of others.
OK, well, Mark, thank you very much indeed for that update from the channel. 2,000 more small boat arrivals since just the beginning of this year, despite the absolutely dreadful weather. Thank you, Mark.
I'm glad you mentioned the weather. Blimey, I just got absolutely drenched on the way into work this morning.
And we're going to talk about some more weather, aren't we?
Absolutely. If you're in search for some weather that's a little bit better than here, London, or indeed the English Channel, here's the forecast for some of those top European holiday destinations.
I forecast a perfect holiday in the sun.
Weather looking good then?
For sure, and no worries about our travel insurance.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations forecast.
Looking ahead to tomorrow, and there's some fairly wet weather affecting some parts of more southern Europe. We have a band of rain sweeping in, affecting Madeira, also Portugal and western parts of Spain. Some stronger winds here as well. A little bit drier across more central parts, some decent sunshine on offer here, but still more unsettled weather affecting eastern parts of the Med towards Greece, towards Cyprus. There's some heavy rain around, but things are looking drier, not necessarily sunny, into the weekend. Bye-bye.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations forecast.
Hello again, here's your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. It was quite a wet start for many of us this morning, and that rain is going to clear away, but then behind it a mixture of sunshine and showers. At the moment there is a weather system pushing its way across the UK, and it's this that's brought quite a bit of rain so far this morning. But like I said, it pushes away towards the east, heavy rain lingering across parts of East Anglia and Kent for a little while as we go into the afternoon. Otherwise though, a mixture of sunshine and showers for many of us. The showers could be quite heavy at times though, with some hail, some thunder, maybe even a bit of snow over the hills and mountains. Across northern Scotland, largely dry here, some decent sunshine and temperatures around average for the time of year for most, just about getting to double figures towards the south. As we go into this evening, staying largely dry across some parts of northern Scotland, but there is a weak front pushing out towards the Hebrides, bringing some outbreaks of rain here. Also some rain pushing into the far east of Scotland as well. Across Northern Ireland, it's looking pretty cloudy and wet to end the day, and more rain also pushing across parts of Wales, and here we're likely to see a bit more snow over the higher ground as well. Elsewhere across the bulk of England, some clear skies as we go into the start of the night, and just a scattering of showers around. Most places will see the showers easing, but a zone of cloudier, wetter weather feeding in across parts of Wales, into the Midlands, and also across parts of northeast England for a time overnight. Away from this zone though, some clear skies allowing for a touch of frost in some places. Lowest temperatures likely to be across parts of Scotland, where they are likely to drop a bit below freezing. As we go through tomorrow, a breezy day across far eastern parts, still a scattering of showers early on. Elsewhere, largely dry, largely sunny, but some showers still likely across parts of western Scotland in particular. Despite the fact that there will be a decent amount of sunshine on offer, temperatures aren't going to rise a huge amount compared to today. In fact, they look fairly similar, again just about getting into double figures.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, good afternoon, Britain. It's 1:50. Now, crowds of angry protesters gathered outside the BBC last night over what they described as anti-Semitic coverage on the channel.
Well, the protest was organised by the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism following a broadcast of a documentary about Gaza, not only featuring the son of a Hamas government official, but also translating biting remarks about Jewish people, saying that it was simply about Israelis.
Yeah, it's quite extraordinary. We're joined by the Chief Executive of the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, Gideon Falter, who was at the protest yesterday. Gideon, just to get things straight, how many people do you think were at the protest last night? Because I was hearing reports that it was 100, 150. Others have been telling me it was more like 1,500, 2,000.
It was certainly more than 1,000 people. I think the 150 comment came from a journalist who arrived before we actually started. And then suddenly the streets were filling up and it spilled out all the way out into the road. So if you know where the BBC is, the whole place was surrounded and they actually had to close the front entrance to the building to keep the crowds contained.
But let's get to the point of this protest, because the more that we learn about this documentary, the more extraordinary it becomes, that money might well have gone from BBC coffers, from taxpayers' pockets, from licence fee payers' pockets, into the hands of Hamas officials.
I mean, this is the thing, you know, Campaign Against Anti-Semitism is a charity, and I know the kind of safeguarding policies that we have to have. At the BBC, it is inconceivable that they broadcast an hour-long film featuring children without having to go through those safeguarding processes of figuring out who the child's parents are and asking whether they're happy for their children to be on screen, whether they're happy for different things to be said. And then they've paid about £400,000 of licence fee payers' money for this programme to happen. And who are you paying it to, BBC? You know, this is a real question. With all this safeguarding check that has to happen, and then they've had to send £400,000 somewhere. And how does one even get money into Gaza at the moment? You know, there are a lot of questions to answer about how all of this has happened. And it's just inconceivable, to me anyway, that some of this money hasn't ended up in the hands of Hamas. And I think that was a real bone of contention amongst everybody who was protesting last night. You know, licensee payers saying, what on earth have you done with our money? Have you sent it as a new low for even the BBC to a proscribed terrorist organisation?
Yeah, I mean, some of the revelations are quite extraordinary. The way that the subtitles for the documentary translated often a Jew or Jews to Israel or Israeli forces. For example, an interviewee praised the Hamas leader for jihad against the Jews, and that was mistranslated by the BBC to say he was fighting Israeli forces. Now, that's a huge, huge difference, isn't it, Gideon?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people were, you know, at the beginning of this story, the BBC was saying, oh, we paid a production company and maybe we should have added a couple of subtitles here and there, you know, to mention that the child's father is a senior figure in Hamas. Getting all of the way through to subtitling, which is something which, you know, is so straightforward. the BBC have clearly decided to cover for terrorists here. The BBC could just be honest that Hamas is an organisation which has a race-based genocidal ideology that wants to see all Jews murdered and translate the subtitles properly. Or they can try and cover for Hamas by sort of making it a little bit more palatable. Oh, they didn't say jihad, they said resistance.
Well, it seems as though they were trying to make it a little bit more palatable, Gideon. I'm so sorry, but we've come to the end of the hour, so we're going to have to leave it there. But thank you very much indeed, Chief Executive of the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism.
Now, of course, we have reached out for the BBC for comment, but they are yet to get back to us. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Don't go anywhere. Much more on Are Your Meats Going to Be Taken Away From You after the weather.
A chilly start will give way to a lovely, warm afternoon. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, here's your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. It was quite a wet start for many of us this morning, and that rain is going to clear away, but then behind it a mixture of sunshine and showers. At the moment there is a weather system pushing its way across the UK, and it's this that's brought quite a bit of rain so far this morning. But like I said, it pushes away towards the east, heavy rain lingering across parts of East Anglia and Kent for a little while as we go into the afternoon. Otherwise though, a mixture of sunshine and showers for many of us. The showers could be quite heavy at times though, with some hail, some thunder, maybe even a bit of snow over the hills and mountains. Across northern Scotland, largely dry here, some decent sunshine and temperatures around average for the time of year for most, just about getting to double figures towards the south. As we go into this evening, staying largely dry across some parts of northern Scotland, but there is a weak front pushing out towards the Hebrides, bringing some outbreaks of rain here. Also some rain pushing into the far east of Scotland as well. Across Northern Ireland, it's looking pretty cloudy and wet to end the day, and more rain also pushing across parts of Wales, and here we're likely to see a bit more snow over the higher ground as well. Elsewhere across the bulk of England, some clear skies as we go into the start of the night, and just a scattering of showers around. Most places will see the showers easing, but a zone of cloudier, wetter weather feeding in across parts of Wales, into the Midlands, and also across parts of northeast England for a time overnight. Away from this zone though, some clear skies allowing for a touch of frost in some places. Lowest temperatures likely to be across parts of Scotland, where they are likely to drop a bit below freezing. As we go through tomorrow, a breezy day across far eastern parts, still a scattering of showers early on. Elsewhere, largely dry, largely sunny, but some showers still likely across parts of western Scotland in particular. Despite the fact that there will be a decent amount of sunshine on offer, temperatures aren't going to rise a huge amount compared to today. In fact, they look fairly similar, again just about getting into double figures.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
There's just 2 weeks left to grab your chance to be one of 2 big winners in our latest Great British giveaway. First, you'll win a totally tax-free £10,000 in cash to spend however you like. You'll also receive the very latest iPhone 16, and we'll send you on a shopping spree with £500 to spend in your favourite store. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB11 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 7th of March. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your-say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here We do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Wednesday, the 26th of February. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emily Carver.
Now, during Prime Minister's questions, the PM and the Leader of the Opposition clashed over defence spending. Kemi Badenoch pressed Starmer over whether or not the government's defence increase includes funding being used for the Chagos Islands deal.
What a scandal that would be. Elsewhere, GB News can exclusively reveal more than 2,000 small boat migrants have crossed illegally from France since the beginning of this year. Well, the grim figure was reached last night as at least 138 migrants arrived into Dover Harbour.
And would you give up your kebab or perhaps sausage roll to save the planet? Well, the Climate Change Committee has said we all need to give up 2 doner kebabs worth of meat a week, scrap our gas boiler and even halve the number of sheep and cattle in the country. Well, the government has accepted their recommendations the previous 6 times. Will they cave again?
If they've accepted them 6 times in a row, they're going to do it again, aren't they?
Well, this is hugely significant. The Climate Change Committee, it's not like a sort of committee of parliament like the select committees that we often discuss. It's a completely separate thing. It's a very powerful beast that was established in the Climate Change Act 2008. And they produce these things, these climate budgets that the government just goes ahead and accepts. And then if a proposal to build something, do something, make something in this country doesn't fit within that budget, well, then the lawyers come calling and you end up having various projects stopped, stalled, prevented in the courts because they don't meet what the Climate Change Committee has said.
And guess who makes up the Climate Change Committee? Of course, it's a lot of people who are very worried indeed about climate change, indeed have spent large portions of their careers talking about only climate change, dealing with only green energy and the like, very much tunnel vision on that carbon target. So it's likely that they're going to go for quite extreme solutions.
And up until now, it's been the sort of low-hanging fruit. I mean, yes, we've sort of had green levies on our energy bills for some time. Yes, there have been elements of sort of decarbonisation that have gone forward without too much complaint from the public. But now we're getting to the tricky stuff. This is the carbon budget that will deal with aviation. We'll deal with us eating meat. We'll deal with farming. You know, all of these issues, our gas boilers, for example, these are things that are going to be really, really significantly affecting our everyday lives. And the question is, could this be the first carbon budget that the government actually rejects?
Maybe, otherwise it's getting a little dystopian. We'll be given credits for good behaviour soon. Let us know what you think, gbnews.com/your say. But it is the headlines with Sam Francis.
Very good afternoon to you. It's just after 2 o'clock. The top story from the newsroom this hour. Kemi Badenoch has accused the Prime Minister of copying her proposal to fund an increase in defence spending with cuts to foreign aid. In a clash at Prime Minister's questions, the Conservative leader said she backs the increase, but questions if it's really £13.4 billion a year, as Mr Starmer claims, or closer to £6 billion, as his Defence Secretary suggested this morning.
How is it that the Defence Secretary says 6 billion and he says 13.4 billion? The IFS said today that the government is playing silly games with numbers. How does he find this difference in numbers?
However, Sir Keir Starmer insists the figure is correct and accused Kemi Badenoch of a desperate search for relevance.
She's appointed herself, I think, saviour of the Western civilization. It's a desperate search for relevance. But, Mr. Speaker, look, if you take the numbers for this financial year and then the numbers for the financial year 27-28, that's £13.4 billion increase. That is the largest sustained increase in defence spending since the Cold War, which will put us in a position to ensure the security and defence of our country and of Europe.
More than 2,000 small boat migrants have crossed the Channel illegally since the start of this year. The latest group of 138 arrived last night, brought into Dover by Border Force after being picked up in UK waters. Earlier, another boat was intercepted after some on board refused French rescue and continued towards Britain. Sources say people smugglers are taking bigger risks, launching even in rough seas after weeks of bad weather. The government, though, is pushing for new laws to criminalise those who reject rescue and are vowing to smash the gangs. Israel is expected to release 600 Palestinian prisoners after a delay over Hamas's treatment of Israeli hostages. They'll be freed in exchange for the bodies of 4 Israeli hostages, likely today or tomorrow. The move clears the way for fresh ceasefire talks as US envoy Steve Witkoff heads to the region. It comes as thousands gathered in Israel to mourn Shiri Bibas and her 2 young sons, whose bodies were returned by Hamas last week. Both have signalled commitment to the ceasefire, but its next phase remains uncertain. BP has confirmed a major U-turn on green energy, slashing more than $5 billion from its net zero spending each year and ramping up oil and gas production instead. They had pledged to cut oil and gas output by 40% by 2030, but the energy giant will now invest up to $10 billion annually in fossil fuels. That's an increase of 20%. BP CEO calls it a reset. Environmental groups, though, and some shareholders are warning the shift could backfire, while Greenpeace says BP should brace for pushback at every turn. Liverpool boss Arne Slot has been handed a 2-game ban for confronting the referee after their 2-2 draw with Everton. The FA have released an official statement confirming he'll miss Wednesday's clash with Newcastle and Southampton's visit on the 8th of March. However, he can be on the sidelines for their Champions League tie against PSG. Their assistant coach, Sipke Holshoff, is also banned for 2 games. Meanwhile, Liverpool and Everton have been fined £65,000 and £50,000 for failing to control their players. And Apple says a bug caused iPhones to briefly display Trump when users said the word racist using voice to text. Clips of the glitch have gone viral, with some Trump supporters accusing the tech giant of political bias. Apple says it's rolling out a fix, blaming a speech recognition issue that briefly suggests words with phonetic similarities. It comes amid wider concerns over political bias in tech after Meta was accused of automatically making users follow Donald Trump after the election. Those are the latest headlines for now. Plenty more still to come right here with Tom and Emily.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Well, good afternoon, Britain. It's 7 minutes past 2. And of course, today, the Prime Minister has been answering questions. Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the opposition, pressed him over whether the government's increase in defence spending includes funding being used for the Chagos Islands deal. Hugely controversial.
Yeah, and he didn't really answer the question. He just said, oh, it's not going to cost as much as you think. There have been some wild numbers thrown around the place. The United States are yet to look at it properly. Didn't answer the question, because if it does end up coming out of the defence budget, then that would be quite a scandal, wouldn't it? Should we get the thoughts of our political correspondent, Catherine Forster, on this one? It was an interesting exchange. Kemi Badenoch didn't seem to land a punch very well. There was a backbencher who also asked this question about whether the Chagos deal would be paid for by defence. Keir Starmer 3 times didn't say.
Yes, answers came there, none. I also asked the Prime Minister's official spokesman just before PMQs, because I was having to rush out straight afterwards, and I didn't get an answer either. Basically, this "there isn't a deal yet" line is coming in to be very, very convenient. But, you know, we've been hearing about this Chagos deal for months and months and months and months, and all these reported costs that may or may not materialise. A very interesting video from Robert Jenrick today, the Shadow Justice Secretary, about it. But no answers at all. And I do think that Kemi Badenoch, for all that Tory MPs thought that she would be able to skewer the Prime Minister at PMQs, it's not really happening. And I thought he was quite brutal with her today when he basically, when she tried to take credit for the, you know, the cut in aid spending that they've announced to pay for the increase in defence. Basically, he said that he hadn't been aware of it at all, and that, you know, she didn't feature in my thinking, and said she's a desperate search for relevance.
It was an uncomfortable exchange, that one. It felt like he was really putting her down.
There was a bit of... I think there was a little bit... I think she probably felt it was a bit of mansplaining as well, because with the numbers on the 13.4 billion that the Prime Minister has said, the extra for defence, or 6 billion that John Healey has suggested, he was a bit like a sort of cross teacher telling off a pupil, and she didn't like that at all, quite rightly.
Shouldn't she be able to stand up to... I mean, I don't think we can retreat behind words like mansplaining when it's the leader of His Majesty's official opposition.
Yeah, but that's because you mansplain, Tom.
I think the term mansplain is just when you're a man and you're explaining.
No, it's when you explain something that the other person knows already, but you think you know better.
But this is what Prime Minister's questions is about. There's always back and forth. My goodness me, how patronising was David Cameron towards Jeremy Corbyn? I mean, this is what you're supposed to have, a back and forth Barney. And I wonder if the leader of the opposition was just a bit too timid and perhaps should have given as much as she got. But Catherine, it is a pertinent question, because how else will this deal be funded if not from the defence budget? It's a deal to lease back a military base that we happen to own right now. I mean, that's military spending, however you cut it.
Yes, well, and we don't know. And I think it's worth saying that we don't actually know, ultimately, if this deal is going to go ahead. I can't even remember what month it was that it was first announced. But at the end of the day, Donald Trump is going to have to yay or nay this. Now, there's this crunch meeting tomorrow for the future of Ukraine and the support of Europe more broadly, that I thought it was notable how the Commons are behind the PM in wishing him well. But, you know, Donald Trump could pull the plug on the whole thing, couldn't he?
He could. And speaking of Donald Trump, Nigel Farage has given some kind, friendly advice to the Prime Minister on how to deal with Donald Trump tomorrow. I'm not sure people really appreciate receiving advice from a political enemy, but there you go.
No, but, of course, Nigel Farage is a great friend of Donald Trump's, and he has been giving some advice. And he said, you know, to make sure to know that the president is sharp as hell and don't be hesitant. He suggested a little bit of flattery, whatever next, and said that if it was him, he'd go in, he'd sort of start with something like, my goodness, you've hit the ground running. I think whatever you may think about what Donald Trump is or is not doing or saying, no one could disagree. He has hit the ground running big time.
Yes, a bit of a sense of humour wouldn't go amiss either, I think, from Keir Starmer.
Might be a stretch from our rather legalistic Prime Minister. But Catherine Forster, thank you very much indeed. But did you ever think about doing your bit for the planet? Well, if you want to, then the amount of meat and dairy you eat, it'll need to fall by at least 1/4.
Yeah, OK. And also, we'll need to get rid of up to a half of our sheep and cattle, which would be quite the blow for British farmers.
Well, new research shows that giving up your doner kebab every week, if you have a weekly doner kebab, well, that'll be enough to keep the UK within safe climate limits by the end of the next decade.
Yes, and interestingly enough, this comes on the same day that BP, the oil giant, has announced it is going to slash renewable energy investments. So it's going to move away from that green stuff and instead focus on what it does best, oil and gas production.
Well, this is a very, very significant moment. It's the latest in what's known as the carbon budgets from the Climate Change Committee, a hugely powerful committee that could have a huge amount of control over the way we live our lives. Let's digest it all with the energy analyst from the Institute of Economic Affairs, Andy Meyer. Andy, up until now, we've had a series of carbon budgets from the Climate Change Committee. This one is significantly more controversial.
Well, you say that, but these things come out every 5 years, and this is the 7th one. And the main thing that we can notice about the coverage from this one is how little people care. And what's fundamentally changed is no one really takes the carbon budget seriously anymore because they know there is no prospect whatsoever of these ones being met. Essentially, they've changed the nature of the political debate in the country already. So we have a net zero target by 2050. And the carbon budgets are supposed to help the government select policies that will get them there. But in reality, the kind of trade-offs involved in doing that, such as raising spending on green initiatives from about £16 billion a year to £40 billion a year, are not realistic. And in a situation where we're having to cut the aid budget to increase military spending by far less than that, what are they going to cut in order to get there?
But this matters because in the past, when the government has accepted one of these carbon budgets from the committee, it means that if, you know, a project is approved or the government passes a law, people can then go to their lawyers and take it to court and say that this does not fit within our carbon budget, this project has to be halted or simply cannot go ahead. It is a breeding ground for the lawfare that we've seen to grow, really, since the Climate Change Act came into force.
So that's why quite a lot of stuff in the UK is paralysed. And it's paralysed both in the planning process and it's paralysed when people try and get it off the ground, of which perhaps the best example was when approval was received for a fracking site in Surrey. It got 12 years down the line and then met the kind of challenge that you're talking about and was canned again. Now, that's not a serious regime for any country, and it's not just things that people are a bit quiffy about, like fracking. It's also solar farms, wind farms, nuclear power stations, in fact, everything that the net zero regimes say that we need to build in order to achieve the targets. So these things are going to change. I mean, the government's already started to deregulate in the area of nuclear power. So it wants the planning process for nuclear power to be far faster. And it's going to have to do that across the board and consider the deregulation of vast swathes of energy infrastructure in order to make progress.
It just seems so irrelevant when we've got a US president saying drill, baby, drill, when we've got oil giants like BP saying that they're going to up the amount they do when it comes to oil and gas. But we here in the United Kingdom think that we are leaders in the world and that everyone will follow what the Climate Change Committee has to say. But they do admit that it will all come with a hefty price tag. So they do admit that this will cost about £5 billion annually over the next 25 years. Is that something that we're just told to accept? And also, Andy, the farmers, they're having a bit of a tough time at the moment, a bit out of touch to say we're going to get rid of half of your sheep and cattle.
Well, as you can see, I'm wearing my patented organic solution to winter at the moment, which is made from the residue of sheep.
There we go.
So, you know, I mean, this is one of the good illustrations of trade-offs in climate debates. This comes from sheep. If we cut the number of sheep, the price of jumpers goes up. If the price of jumpers goes up, we're going to have more old people freezing in their homes because they don't want to turn the thermostat up because they can't afford the energy, and so on. So when the Climate Change Committee puts out these grand reports of what the world's going to be like in 15 years' time, they haven't got a clue. No one knows what the price of anything is going to be next week, let alone in that time period. So what the government should be doing is ruthlessly focusing on how we're going to get secure, affordable energy with decarbonisation as a long-term issue in the background. If we focus on affordability and security, then the most affordable decarbonisation solutions like nuclear power will be deployed first. And if we do that, then a lot of the things that the Climate Change Committee is saying that we need to do will actually happen regardless.
Politically, how does the government actually reject this proposal from the Climate Change Committee? Because they have accepted and written into law the previous carbon budgets. This would have to be the first time that the government, and let's be frank, a Labour government, it was the Labour government that brought the Climate Change Act into our legislation in 2008. They would have to, for the first time, say, no, this is the wrong course. That's a really difficult political move to make.
Well, they won't do that. They'll thank the committee for their wonderful advice and then talk about the amazing plans they have to see it in reality. and then reality will actually bite and the policies won't happen. And at some point, as you say, activist groups will take them to court, and the court will say you need to change policy, but Parliament is still sovereign. So some government in the future is going to bin the Climate Change Act. This committee will have its role reduced to that of measurement, probably, and possibly looking at things like carbon pricing, which actually matters. But the current setup, it's a sock puppet. It's the state taking £7 million a year of taxpayers' money in order to advise the state on lobbying.
Well, you mentioned where we're going to get to eventually. It's going to be a very, very messy road to get there if we have the government missing its targets but having accepted these recommendations and then lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit for anyone that wants to do anything in business in this country.
I just don't understand why Professor Chris Evans, Dr Marina Romanello and Professor Natalie Seddon get to decide this stuff for us. I mean, I'm sure they're very intelligent and they're very interested in climate change and sustainability and all of that. They're not elected.
No. Well, I suppose it is our elected parliament that keeps approving these budgets.
They do, yeah.
Andy Murray of the IEA, thanks so much for coming in and talking us through that. It's going to be a bumpy, bumpy ride.
OK, well, a different story for you. Croydon has been crowned the UK's fly-tipping capital with more illegal dumps than anywhere else.
Well, shocking figures reveal that the council is also paying a hefty price to clean up this mess.
Yeah, so the council taxpayers, not a great time for them. Cross over to Croydon and speak with GB News reporter Adam Cherry, who's on bin watch today. Adam, people aren't putting their rubbish in the bins, they're putting it on the streets.
Yeah, we've been on a bit of a patrol mission today around Croydon looking out for hotspots, and what we found is pretty staggering. Those watching on television will see behind me a sort of example of what you can expect. Mattresses, prams, trolleys, a lot of debris on the streets. And the new stats released today show a pretty grim picture for England more broadly. I'll just give you some of the stats because they're quite extraordinary. So for the most recent set of data, 1.15 million fly tipping incidents, an increase of 6% from the previous year. And the most common size category for incidents was a small van load, which you think is bad enough, but actually, if you look, there are 47,000 incidents in which the size of the rubbish on the road was a tipper lorry load size or larger, which is an increase of 11%. And the amount of preventive action, the amount of fixed penalty notices, is going down. So there's more rubbish on the streets and less prevention. If you talk to people on the streets, they're obviously not happy about it. So this is what those in Croydon had to say to me earlier today.
I'd like to see them catch the people that's doing it, you know, so that people don't do it, you know, the stronger deterrent to stop it.
Local councils should provide more of disposable places where you can just easy access to. Want to check the rubbish, they ask you for a permit. I live in Croydon, I've got my driver's license says Croydon, and he's asking me for a permit.
To make
and
it
then
easier.
All I have to do is just do a U-turn, chuck it, and then I don't do it personally, but that's how people think.
So as you see, people not happy, and why would they be? It's their local community, their council tax is going up, and their streets are getting dirtier. It doesn't take very long to drive around here and see the evidence of it. One person I spoke to even said that there are people driving around offering to clean it up for you, sort of making a quick buck off it. So you can see why people are getting so angry about this, guys.
There's a problem, there's a money-making potential, isn't there? Adam, thank you very much indeed. Adam Cherry there in Croydon, the UK fly-tipping capital. That's wonderful, isn't it, for Croydon?
And wonderful for Adam to become our bin correspondent.
Jack Carson passed the baton on to him. But the problem is, isn't it, once an area becomes dirty and you see other people doing it, you're far more likely to do it yourself. Because it's like, well, if they're doing it at number 11, why shouldn't I?
Yeah.
You know, and then it just spirals.
Exactly, and if the street is completely cleaned and you get that first bit of rubbish, then the acceleration can be avoided.
I had that on my street. These guys were just dropping litter on the side of the road. The next day I went out with a bin bag and cleared it up. I was so angry.
I did that on my street the other week, actually. There was a McDonald's bag just left in the middle of the road. And I'm like, what do people do? I mean, it's not like there aren't bins at the end of the street. What do people...
People need to be more like us, Tom.
In so many ways.
Look after your community.
Shall we hear what the Secretary of State for the Environment had to say about this? Steve Reed said that fly tipping is a disgraceful act which trashes communities and its increase is unacceptable. Communities and businesses shouldn't have to put up with these crimes.
Yes, the government will crack down on fly tipping and punish rubbish dumpers, forcing them to clean up their mess. Through the new crime and policing bill, we will also give ministers the power to issue statutory guidance to councils to drive up fly tipping enforcement. I do hope they make some progress on this.
Absolutely. I'd like to see people who drop the litter pick up the litter. Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Plenty more to come. Indeed, are parents too friendly with their children? And should they embrace being an authority figure? We're having that debate.
I can hear my mum saying yes, yes.
That debate coming up next.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Well, it's an ice sculpture of an older man living in poverty, and it's been unveiled at the Tate Modern. But this is for an issue that I know basically all of our viewers and listeners, and ourselves included, really do care about.
Yeah, the activity was organised by the charity Independent Age, and it's to raise awareness of the dire financial struggles facing some older people.
Rob Trueheller is a 68-year-old pensioner who the ice sculpture depicts. Now, he's had his winter fuel payment cut off following Labour's tax raid.
Yes, and taxi driver Rob Trueheller joins us now alongside the Head of Policy and Influencing at Independent Age, Morgan Vine. Welcome both. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Start with you, Rob. I mean, what does this sculpture mean to you then?
Well, it's there to... it's a focal point for people to look at and to understand that there's a lot of pensioners in poverty. You know, the winter fuel allowance, which was a mere spit in the ocean, really, £250 for each person, makes a heck of a difference when, you know, electricity prices, etc., are going up.
Talk to me about how this idea came about then and what Independent Age does.
So Independent Age is a national charity and we provide free independent support to older people living on a low income. We try and make sure that they're getting all of the money they're entitled to. And we also use the evidence that comes through our services and through the grants that we give out to try and work out some of the systemic problems. And one of those is that older people just don't have enough money to live on. As Rob said, they're not receiving the money they're entitled to, many of them. But even for those people that are receiving that money, it's often not enough to live on. So we think that there's more that the UK government and companies and others can do to try and improve the situation.
Yeah.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 27 minutes past 2. Now, Britain's strictest head teacher says that parents should stop giving their children choices in food and clothes and should embrace being authority figures.
Yeah, she's argued that parenting guidance written by the middle classes is destroying child rearing among the working classes, and we need to introduce parenting books that teach children the right from wrong. So essentially what she's saying here is that too many parents, particularly middle-class parents, treat their children as if they're their mate. You know, they want to be on their side with everything.
Best friends.
They want to be best friends, rather than actually being a figure of authority. So is that a problem?
Yes, is Catherine Birbalsingh right? Well, to discuss this, we're joined by the journalist and mum of two, Julie Cook, who agrees, and the business manager and mum, Sally Mitchell, who doesn't. Sally, why is Catherine Birbalsingh wrong?
I don't see a problem with being both. Why can't you be a friend to your child and also a figure of authority? You know, no one's saying that it's an easy ride bringing up a child, but I can assure you, being a mother of two older children, the relationship changes. And what they need less from you is that authority as they grow up, and more guidance, support, especially in this modern world. They need so much support. And I think it's a real shame if you can't say that your children, by the time they get to adulthood, are your friends. You know, there's nothing I like more than hanging out with my grown-up kids.
OK, well, Julie, you take a different view, do you?
Well, I agree that the relationship changes, and I think that as they become young adults, yes, of course, you hope you're their friend. I hope that with mine. I've got a 16-year-old and an 11-year-old. At the moment, I'm having that issue with my 16-year-old. You know, am I his friend or am I his parent? Well, when he needs to revise his GCSEs, I'm blimmin' well his parent, and I tell him what to do. And I think that's the trouble. I have younger kids, and they need that. They still need that. You need to keep them on that leash. You need that guidance, because if you give them an inch, they will take a mile.
What do you say to that, Sally, that perhaps people are getting a bit too friendly, a bit too early, and then the authority's gone?
Well, I think every family is completely different, the dynamic, I have to say. But don't forget, there are families that are not made up of the classic nuclear setup. There are all sorts of pressures on the modern family. Sometimes one of the parents, biological parents, don't actually live in the home. So what do we say to that father or mother who is living elsewhere? If you're not present all the time to do the authority bit, what role is left for you? You have to be their friend, or it's a very nice position to be in. I think the head teacher is right in what she says in her article, that it's not the teacher's responsibility to teach basic things like toilet training or how to hold a knife and fork. That's not what they're at school for. And that is the responsibility of the parent. And maybe some parents don't have the time to do that. Maybe they're not interested. But that's about quality or non-quality parenting. I don't see that you can't be their friend and still give that hard advice, that dose of truth, in a very friendly, supportive way. Knowing that your parent has always got your back, I think, is the most wonderful gift that you can give any child.
The problem is, though, Julie, isn't the issue that if, as a parent, you're keen to be your child's friend, you're going to want them to like you always, and therefore you're not going to want to say the word no.
Exactly that. Yes, I have this with my 11-year-old. I want this, I want that, I'm ordering this online, I want to do that. And you have to say no. And that doesn't make you a popular person. That doesn't make you their friend. Suddenly, then you are the authority figure because you've got the money, you're the decision maker for them. And I agree with pretty much 90% of what that wonderful headmistress says. I think she's amazing. I think everything she says should be, put in stone somewhere, because I think she's fantastic. But I agree, you can't bring up children unless you are the authority figure to some degree, because they look up to you and follow your guidance. I don't think you can be a friend and still steer them the right way all the time. That's the trouble.
Sally, is there a sort of a wider malaise here, a sort of societal degeneration from where we used to be as a country, or perhaps as a hemisphere? I'm not sure. I mean, 50 years ago, we'd have much more clear sort of structures and rules about sort of who to follow and what to do. And that all seems to have broken down a little bit in recent years. Perhaps that's a good thing in some circumstances, but it does make discipline harder.
Yeah, it is. And also there are different pressures. When I was being brought up that time ago, it was probably Dr. Spock back then, babies on their fronts and all sorts of stuff. And certainly the relationship I had with my parents is very different to the one that I have with my children. We are much more on equal terms, if you like, and it's less, I suppose, traditional. And it works really, really well for us. But I'm a single parent. That makes the dynamic of the family and the household really quite different. I don't know if it's a malaise. I think life has changed so much. The pressures that teenagers and even children as young as 8 or 9 are starting to face is so different to when I was growing up, when I was a teenager. And I think we have to adapt to support those needs and requirements that are very different to before.
OK, well, thank you to you both. That was a really interesting discussion. Julie Cook and Sally Mitchell there. There was some agreement, but some disagreement there. I can't help but think about the time, Tom, where I think I was about 16 and I was invited to a house party and my mum found out that there was no adult there. She drove round and literally dragged me out of the party. Biggest humiliation ever. But looking back, it was probably a good thing because I think there was some naughtiness going on at that party. So there you go, Mum. You probably did the right thing. Not trying to be my friend, eh?
See, I've got
certainly not trying to be my friend.
I've got an older sister. She broke down all of those barriers before me. You know, she always pestered to have the party, to go to the club, to do this and that. By the time I was getting to her age, it was like, Tom, aren't you going to go to that party? And this is your sister did. And so she just completely broke down
so you're
all
not
those
as much of an
barriers.
issue. I remember crying, weeping and wailing. I really want to go to that party. No, no.
Goodness me. How
Not
times
allowed.
change.
Never allowed.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain. Plenty more to come. Indeed, an exclusive 2,000 more small boat migrants have crossed since the chilly, chilly January began. A new milestone to be discussed after your headlines.
Good afternoon. Your headlines at 2:34. Kemi Badenoch accused the Prime Minister of copying her proposal to fund an increase in defence spending with cuts to foreign aid. In a clash at Prime Minister's questions, a Conservative leader said she backs the increase, but questions if it's really £13.4 billion a year, as Mr Starmer claims, or closer to £6 billion, as his Defence Secretary suggested this morning.
How is it that the Defence Secretary says $6 billion and he says $13.4 billion? The IFS said today that the government is playing silly games with numbers. How does he find this difference in numbers?
However, Sir Keir Starmer insists the figure is correct and accused Kemi Badenoch of desperate search for relevance.
She's appointed herself, I think, saviour of the Western civilization. It's a desperate search for relevance. But, Mr. Speaker, look, if you take the numbers for this financial year and then the numbers for the financial year 27-28, that's £13.4 billion increase. That is the largest sustained increase in defence spending since the Cold War, which will put us in a position to ensure the security and defence of our country and of Europe.
In other news, more than 2,000 small boat migrants have crossed the Channel illegally since the start of the year. That's according to GBNews. The latest group of 138 arrived last night, brought into Dover by Border Force after being picked up in UK waters. Earlier, another boat was intercepted after some on board refused French rescue and continued towards Britain. Sources say people smugglers are taking bigger risks, launching even in rough seas after weeks of bad weather. The government is pushing new laws to criminalise those who reject rescue as Labour vows to smash the gangs. And Going for Gold presenter Henry Kelly has died at the age of 78. His family has confirmed the Dublin-born writer and broadcaster died peacefully on Tuesday after a period of ill health. In their statement, they said Henry will be sorely missed by his friends and family, including his partner, Carolyn, their son, Alexander, Henry's daughter, Siobhan, and her mother, Marjorie. Those are the latest GB News headlines. More in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Russell Holding. In North Yorkshire, the A59 is blocked by an accident on the High Street in Knaresborough, causing delays. In Greater Manchester, the A34 is closed northbound along the Kingsway towards the Gatley traffic lights in Cheadle after an accident, with delays towards there. In Wrexham, the A5152 is partly blocked by an accident on Ruaben Road, causing delays. In Nottinghamshire, the A60 is closed each way between Bradmore and Ruddington after an accident causing queues. On the M1 in Hertfordshire, 2 lanes are closed southbound just after junction 6A for the M25, where cars overturned, the queues towards there from junction 8 at Hemel Hempstead. In Berkshire, the A4 is closed westbound from Charville to Sonning after an accident causing long delays, and in East Sussex, the A22 is closed in both directions between Park Corner at Whitesmith and Golden Cross after an accident causing queues. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
No,
because the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's coming up to 20 to 3. Now, here's one for you. The President of the United States, yes, the actual President of the United States, has taken to social media to share a bizarre AI-generated video showcasing what appears to be a new vision of the Gaza Strip. But it's slightly different. Let's take a look.
Set you free, bringing the light for all to see. No more tunnels, no more fear. Trump Gaza is finally here. Trump Gaza shining bright, a golden future, a brand new light. Feast and dance, the deal is done. Trump Gaza #1. Trump Gaza shining bright, golden future, a brand new light. Feast and dance, the deal is done. Trump Gaza #1.
Well, it's upset quite a few people, hasn't it, Tom?
I mean, it's bonkers. It's clearly bonkers, but it just got me thinking. I mean, the aesthetics of that, it looks like Dubai, doesn't it?
Yeah,
and, I mean, and
Las Vegas.
But, like, it could be, couldn't it? I mean, Gaza, it's got a beautiful beachfront. If it had the right governance, it wouldn't be this humanitarian disaster. It could be shining and golden and beautiful. Obviously, it should be a Muslim country, not run by Israel, not run by the United States. But maybe Donald Trump wants to give up his job as President of the United States. Maybe he was born to be a Middle Eastern sheikh. His love of gold, all of those aesthetics, his distaste for alcohol, his many, many wives. Perhaps he'd fit right in.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps. Now, this is the trouble that AI can get you into. You can make anything, can't you? Generate anything. But yes, this is trolling from the President of the United States.
I think clearly, yeah.
I mean, he was talking. This was his big plan. You know, this area of Gaza could be the new Dubai, could be a new Mediterranean strip where people can go on holiday.
Is that a mad idea?
It'd be fantastic. I'm not sure if it fits with the culture at the moment.
No, but if it's run by the UAE. If it's run by Saudi Arabia, if Trump can do a deal to say, as long as it's not run by, a Western power, if it's run by a Middle Eastern in power, if they do the governance, they set down the law.
Yeah.
I mean, like...
The problem was, though, he was on a deck chair with Benjamin Netanyahu at the end.
I think that wouldn't go down well there, no.
Wouldn't go down very well. Let us know what you make of it. Just a bit of fun or a bit of a dangerous one from the President of the United States. Anyway, in other news, GB News can exclusively reveal more than 2,000 small boat migrants have crossed illegally from France just since the beginning of this year.
Well, the figure reached last night. Well, at least 138 more migrants arrived into Dover Harbour.
Well, Mark White is here to tell us more, our Home and Security editor, of course. Mark, the numbers keep ticking in the wrong direction, and the weather has been so dreadful.
Yes, I mean, the weather has been appalling, really, for the last couple of months. Of course, we're in the winter and we expect bad weather, but it's been particularly bad. So all the more surprising that, given that 2,000 plus have now crossed the English Channel to the UK, and there are thousands of others, we're told, still on the French side of the Channel, massing in the camps around Dunkirk, Calais and Boulogne, looking to catch their boat across the Channel as well to the UK. And what we've seen, according to maritime security sources, are the people smugglers taking increasing risks with those migrants, pushing the boats out into weather conditions that they normally wouldn't try to get across the Channel in, because the swells are just too much, the wind is too high. But they've been doing that. That's added to the dangers. Yesterday, French authorities told us that they responded to multiple incidents in which migrant boats got into difficulties and ended up having to rescue dozens of migrants. One incident in particular, a few miles off the coast near Dunkirk, where an overcrowded boat with more than 60 on board got into difficulties. The French arrived. They took 38 people off that boat, but 24 others refused to get off the boat and continued the journey to the UK and were picked up by Border Force when they reached UK waters. We should say as well that the British government is currently passing its borders and security bill through the Parliament at the moment, and as part of that bill there will be a specific law which outlaws those who refuse assistance offered to them by the rescue services, and they can be charged with endangering the lives of others once that bill has received royal assent. But at the moment, the trajectory we're in, again, looks like we could be in for another bumper year. We are matching where we were last year, where 36,800 people crossed the Channel compared to the 29,500 who crossed the year before. We're going to at least match that this year and potentially overtake it.
Goodness me.
OK, Mark White, thank you very much indeed for bringing us the very latest. I mean, Tom, did you see that recent case that came to light about how children were being put on the boat and then the parents were asking to then come to the UK because their children were in this country?
Yeah.
Very, very worrying if people are going to go to that dangerous length. Put your children on the boat and then you can get residency here as well.
It just needs to be stopped.
Terrible.
It really, really does. But if you're trying to get away from all of this, perhaps you want some winter sun. Let's see the forecast.
I forecast a perfect holiday in the sun.
Weather looking good then?
For sure, and no worries about our travel insurance.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations forecast.
Looking ahead to tomorrow, and there's some fairly wet weather affecting some parts of more southern Europe. We have a band of rain sweeping in, affecting Madeira, also Portugal and western parts of Spain. Some stronger winds here as well. A little bit drier across more central parts, some decent sunshine on offer here, but still more unsettled weather affecting eastern parts of the Med towards Greece, towards Cyprus. There's some heavy rain around, but things are looking drier, not necessarily sunny, into the weekend. Bye-bye.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations forecast.
Hello again, here's your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. It was quite a wet start for many of us this morning, and that rain is going to clear away, but then behind it a mixture of sunshine and showers. At the moment there is a weather system pushing its way across the UK, and it's this that's brought quite a bit of rain so far this morning. But like I said, it pushes away towards the east, heavy rain lingering across parts of East Anglia and Kent for a little while as we go into the afternoon. Otherwise though, a mixture of sunshine and showers for many of us. The showers could be quite heavy at times though, with some hail, some thunder, maybe even a bit of snow over the hills and mountains. Across northern Scotland, largely dry here, some decent sunshine and temperatures around average for the time of year for most, just about getting to double figures towards the south. As we go into this evening, staying largely dry across some parts of northern Scotland, but there is a weak front pushing out towards the Hebrides, bringing some outbreaks of rain here. Also some rain pushing into the far east of Scotland as well. Across Northern Ireland, it's looking pretty cloudy and wet to end the day, and more rain also pushing across parts of Wales. And here we're likely to see a bit more snow over the higher ground as well. Elsewhere across the bulk of England, some clear skies as we go into the start of the night, and just a scattering of showers around. Most places will see the showers easing, but a zone of cloudier, wetter weather feeding in across parts of Wales, into the Midlands, and also across parts of northeast England for a time overnight. Away from this zone though, some clear skies allowing for a touch of frost in some places. Lowest temperatures likely to be across parts of Scotland, where they are likely to drop a bit below freezing. As we go through tomorrow, a breezy day across far eastern parts, still a scattering of showers early on. Elsewhere, largely dry, largely sunny, but some showers still likely across parts of western Scotland in particular. Despite the fact that there will be a decent amount of sunshine on offer, temperatures aren't going to rise a huge amount compared to today. In fact, they look fairly similar, again just about getting into double figures.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
down to earth,
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
and most importantly, honest,
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point. He's lying. I mean, maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, I think it's about time we wrap things up. It is 2:50.
Okay,
we
bye then.
finish in a few minutes.
Right, in a bit. Sorry.
No,
right.
you see the Prince and Princess of Wales, because
yes.
we've got some footage of them. They've been very busy making Welsh cakes for locals in Pontypridd to celebrate St David's Day on Saturday.
Yes, elsewhere, ahead of Ramadan, the King and Queen have been meeting with British Muslim women at a female-led restaurant and helping to pack donation boxes.
No men allowed. We're joined now by GB News royal correspondent Cameron Walker. The royal family have been very busy today.
Yeah, they certainly have, but it was a bit of a stop-start for the Prince and Princess of Wales this morning. In classic British transport style, their train was delayed by at least 90 minutes to Wales, to Pontypridd. The reason was flooding, and which was a bit ironic, really, because as well as making Welsh cakes, which I'm told they handed out to the crowds in Pontypridd afterwards, they also spoke to local businesses really seriously affected by the flooding, particularly from the recent storms earlier on this year. But they were saying the relentless flooding that keeps happening over the last 5 years or so, and the little support from the government afterwards, this is what the local businesses were telling William and Catherine, means that their businesses are now uninsurable. So Prince William was asking, well, what solutions do you need? Of course, very careful to stay out of politics himself. This is them, as you see on your screens if you're watching on television, making the Welsh cakes, preparing them ahead of St David's Day on Saturday and handing them out. They did hand them out to locals as well. They also did a little bit of a walkabout with the crowds outside in the pouring rain, the Prince and Princess of Wales. There was a small group of protesters who said we need money for flooding, not handshakes during the walkabout, but I can tell you they were very much in the minority. A vast majority of people there were there to welcome and greet the Prince and Princess of Wales. And I think perhaps many would argue that arguably we wouldn't be talking about the devastating flooding that happened in that community if it wasn't for the Prince and Princess of Wales's visit, bearing in mind that flooding did happen a couple of months ago. But of course, elsewhere, the King and Queen have been in London, a bit of a surprise trip to Kingly Court in central London, just off of Oxford Circus, to visit, as you said, a local community, a female-led restaurant, a Syrian restaurant ahead of Ramadan. You can see the Queen there, and hopefully you can see the King as well in a minute, packing some food parcels for a local charity which supports homeless families in London. We know the King and Queen are keen to support all the different religions who live in the United Kingdom. There we are. There's the King and Queen putting some dates in bags, which is the traditional breaking of fast that you have for the Muslim community in Ramadan.
Oh, that is...
Look at them getting stuck in. This is great. Great video.
And also, we're told that the lady sat next to them, who's the business owner, was saying that the King and Queen were really rapid at putting all the dates into the bag. She wasn't expecting them to be so fast, so she didn't have time to put the labels on. So they had a lot of banter, I think, the King and Queen meeting local businesses in London. So yeah, busy day for the royals all around.
It looks like Queen Camilla might have taken a little package home. A little, doggy bag home.
She's
the food looks quite tasty.
Probably a fan. But Cameron, to get back to this flood and delayed train, I suppose it does show that while being, I suppose, constitutionally above us all, they're affected by just the same sort of irritations with public transport that we all are too.
Absolutely. I mean, they're often criticised perhaps for taking helicopters, members of the royal family, but sometimes they do take public transport and the train. I'm sure security were a little bit concerned that the train had to be diverted because of this flooding. But yeah, I think they are a little bit down with the people sometimes, and they are delayed just like the rest of us.
Fantastic stuff. Cameron Walker, our royal correspondent there, updating us on the toing and froing of the royal family.
Absolutely. Hope they keep their feet dry.
They presumably get a whole carriage to themselves, away from the riffraff.
I'd hope so. So. Away from us common folk.
Yes.
Well, that's it for Good Afternoon Britain, but do not move a muscle. The one and only Martin Daubney will be here in this studio for you after the weather forecast.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, I'm here with your latest Met Office weather update for GB News. Looking further ahead through the rest of this week, we are going to see high pressure building, so most of the rain, the showers will clear away and a decent amount of sunshine on offer tomorrow. But before all that, well, we did have a frontal system marching its way across the UK today. That brought some heavy rain for a time and then plenty of showers following in behind. So more showers to come as we go through this evening, but they will start to ease overnight. That being said, quite a bit of cloud for Northern Ireland, some outbreaks of rain, and also into parts of northeast England, the Midlands and Wales, even a bit of sleet and snow over the higher ground here. But away from the cloudier zone, there will be some clearer skies, and under the clearer skies, temperatures taking a little bit of a dip, some places seeing a touch of frost, particularly across some parts of Scotland, the sheltered glens in particular, likely to drop a bit below freezing. So first thing tomorrow morning, a chilly start across Scotland, but quite a bright one. Some showers across northern and western parts. Here they're going to continue through a large chunk of the day, and some of those showers could be a bit wintry at times. A couple of showers around coastal parts of Northern Ireland. Across much of England and Wales, largely dry, but a few showers for parts of Wales and southwest England. Perhaps more frequent showers affecting eastern parts of England, East Anglia towards Lincolnshire, for example. And here it will be quite blustery through the morning, but the winds will ease here and the showers will die out as well. Otherwise then, and for most places, there will be a decent amount of dry, bright, if not sunny weather on offer. Still some showers though continuing towards the northwest. Temperatures around average for the time of year, most places getting to high single figures, some places scraping into double digits towards the south. With that high pressure building as we go through Thursday and into Friday, we will see most of the showers dying out, and a largely calm and clear night means it is going to be a chilly one. So a bit of a frosty start for many of us on Friday morning, but otherwise a largely fine picture, especially towards the south in the weekend, wetter further north.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Don't Don't miss your chance to be one of 2 big winners in our latest Great British giveaway, as we have 2 prize bundles that have to be won. There's 2 lots of a totally tax-free £10,000 in cash. You'll also receive a brand new iPhone 16, along with £500 in shopping vouchers to spend at your favourite store. Hurry, lines close on the 7th of March. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB11 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 7th of March. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation,
Because
the failure is-
You're
the failure is-
deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back,
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
and we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes and Kerr weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight.